I think more than 6 months now. I haven't been
Yes.
tracked the time, but it's been a while. So imagine the situation of them, right? Like living in those conditions for so long. And I don't know if you're aware that they were also cut the water, the service of water. Like they don't
Yes.
even have running water in that embassy. Um, Another interesting fact is that that embassy, since Argentina is no longer having diplomatic relations with Venezuela, because the Venezuelan government kicked the diplomatic mission of Argentina, they kicked them out. The one that is being providing this protection to these six individuals is the Brazilian government, which is not reliable because it's a government that is friends with Maduro. So it's a very stressful situation. These people, they're brave because they were persecuted since the campaign was running, because they were part of Maria Corina's team. They are part of Maria Corina's team. So they were punished because of that. And instead of leaving and fleeing the country, all that they did was to assume the situation that you were going to live in an embassy for only God knows how long. Like, imagine how committed you need to be to see your country free to take that kind of decision.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 217. I'm talking to Ana Rizo. She is living safer in Canada, but she is from Venezuela. She's the head of the Ladies of Liberty Alliance in Canada, or well, she's the
Yes.
head of in Canada. But we're going to talk about what's been going on in Venezuela, which of course in Spanish means Little Venice, and because she knows people who have been arrested. I know people who are hiding out in an embassy right now in Caracas. Uh, and we're going to talk about what's going on in Venezuela and what we think might be the prospects for Venezuela. It's a here. I haven't been there, but I've heard it's a wonderful place. How are you, Anna?
Hi, thank you for inviting me, Chris. I appreciate the opportunity of being in your podcast. And I know that we're going to have a very good conversation about all these topics.
Yes. So how did you get into all this? First of all, how did you become a libertarian?
Well, actually, I think it goes back to 2014. I was graduating from law school back in my country, and I like back in 2014 is with Venezuela, when Venezuela was already starting to show all these indicia of, like hyperinflation, the fact that we were running out of products. Actually, back in the day, people were already lining up to buy bread, to buy essential products, food, all this kind of stuff, alongside other things that were happening in the country, like high criminality rate, abuse of power, censorship, many things coming together. And it was a regime that was already becoming totalitarian back in the day. And I wanted to know, like, why is this like this? Like, I remember, typically people, like young people, are very left leaning. So I will hear the typical story of, oh, what we have here is not real socialism. What we have here is not real uh, communism, things like that. Or then you go to the other side and they will say, like, no, what we need is a nationalist conservative government like we had in the past, and blah blah blah. And I remember listening to all this and I was like, just trying to read and figure out myself. And then I got accepted into a seminar with the Cato Institute in Caracas back in the day. And I went there, and then I started to hear from people like Axel Kaiser, for example, and other libertarians that were invited, including the son of Mario Vargas Llosa. And I was like, wow, what they're explaining is what makes sense. And also, my dad is an economist. So I remember my dad explaining me back in the day, like, supply and demand, how the market works. And then I connected all the dots and I was like, of course, this is what we need to do. Like, we need to be more market focused. We need to pay attention to the economics, and what the country has been doing and what the government has been doing is completely the opposite. And that's why we are in this situation that we are right now. So that's how I kind of like became a libertarian.
Yeah, that's a great story. Axel Kaiser, yeah, he's been on here. Mario Vargas Llosa, don't know him, unfortunately, but probably should get to meet him sometime. So you got there in 2014. Things were already looking pretty bad. So let's go back, maybe to around the 1990 or so. How did Venezuela get to where it is right now?
Well, that Venezuela is a very interesting case of a country that was already under democratic socialism in the past. And then instead of like turning into another direction, they decided like, oh, maybe we need like more socialism. Essentially, that's what happened with Hugo Chavez. When Hugo Chavez gets elected, Venezuela had already in the past a democratic socialist government. It's something like similar to what Justin Trudeau has been doing in Canada, for
Yeah.
example. So imagine that Canadians go from Justin Trudeau to someone that is even more left leaning. That's
Yes.
essentially what Venezuela did in the 90s with a guy that already tried to do a coup d'etat in the 90s. He tried to murder the running president I think it was
Yes.
1992. That was the year I was born.
Yes.
So like all these things happen, and that was the initial red flag, because you shouldn't elect as a president a guy that did something like that. That's already a person that is not a good indicator to become a president. Let's be clear. So in the following years, he started a project that is called Socialism of the 21st Century. So what he was selling was the left-wing ideas that already came from Cuba, the Soviet Union, all these countries, but adapting it to a modern version. And even people like Noam Chomsky in the past, they say like, oh, Venezuela, they're doing great with the socialism of the 21st century. Chavez got the right formula. I remember that he used to praise Hugo Chavez, and it was just the same old socialism, and like the result is evident because he started to apply policies of state control. He censored the media, he persecuted the opposition, he started to impose price controls, control the economy, expropriate businesses on national TV, productive businesses, which impacted the productive chain of the country. And this led to inflation and scarcity. Well, actually, more like scarcity and inflation, because in the end of the day, you know how supply and demand works. If you don't get enough of a product, the price is going to increase because people are going to need that. And that's essentially how it happened in Venezuela. So I remember that Donald Trump said once, I think it was in the United Nations, like, the case of Venezuela is not that socialism wasn't properly applied, is that it was successfully applied. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, so you mentioned that in the 90s there was democratic socialism. So what was already there in the 90s? I mean, what was healthcare like? What was, old age? Was there some type of social security, or what was
Yeah,
already there before Chavez?
yeah, like Venezuela already had public education, for example. Like Venezuelans had we come from a period that it was very prosperous in oil, right? So
Yes.
Venezuelans rely a lot in oil. And this meant that these oil revenues were used, a lot of them, for social assistance, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because in the end of the day, that actually was helpful to a lot of people. Like in Venezuela, the best universities on the country back then were actually public universities. People didn't need to pay for them. Or, for example, Venezuelans could go to public hospitals, and we had also a private sector running on the side. Because that's the thing, right? Like back in the day, you had the public sector, but you also had private alternatives. So if you had the money to pay for a private clinic, you could go to one. If you had the alternative to pay for a private university, you could go to one as well. So what we had was, yeah, pretty much a system that it was kind of mixed. But yeah, like you mentioned, like it was also like very they get a lot of social programs. They used to have like the oil company was already nationalized back in the
Yes.
day, run by the government. So yeah.
Yeah, that's something that often happens, especially in a lot of these resource-rich countries. Like Saudi Arabia, and you said Chavez tried to coup, so basically his career has not really been all that much different from Hitler. Uh, Hitler tried a coup, and then after that failed, he realized, okay, maybe we can try this going through the system. So Chavez went to jail. What did he write a book like Mein Kampf and get out, or what happened after
He
that?
actually wrote a book, and the one who gave him like a forgiveness. I don't know the term in English, but he gave like a forgiveness to him, so he
Yeah,
was released. Was the former president Rafael Caldera in the 90s. So that's something that happened with Chavez back in the day. And he got, because of that, he was able to be released, and later on he ran for president. What we need to remind our audience is that Chavez was also a very charming leader. Like the guy knew how to communicate with a lot of people in Venezuela. And, an interesting fact is that even though later on, most of the support that Hugo Chavez received came from the humble or poor people, initially, the ones that voted for Hugo Chavez was the middle class. So he was able to communicate with the middle class of the country. It's ironic because later on the middle class was the main target of his government.
yes. So that was Rafael Caldera, who,
Yeah.
yeah, Caldera. So yeah, is he still alive, or
No, he
he
died.
died in 2009?
He died already.
Was that a case of Chavez going out and killing his useful idiot, or did he just die of natural causes?
No, he just died naturally. He left the country, never came back. He actually he was pretty old, to be honest. Even
Okay.
when he was running the second term, he was pretty old.
So yeah, so he did he ever apologize or anything like that, or did he just say, "Oh,
I honestly don't remember any of that, but I do know that many Venezuelans hated him for that.
yeah, yeah, I haven't seen Chavez's speeches, but that's one thing they say. There's a lot of rhetoric in there, and the way he uses words. Yeah, in America, we usually call it a pardon or a commutation. A pardon is when you just say, okay, the president basically says this person is innocent of the crimes. They're out of jail, or they're pardoned before they even are on trial, so then they're never on trial. But a commutation is, okay, you've been in jail for 5 years, we'll let you out, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. No, and in the case of Hugo Chavez, like his speeches, like he would take the national TV and you could be watching, I don't know, your favorite soccer match, your telenovela, and then all of a sudden, this is the message of the executive of the nation, the president. So, you had to stay there. Like, I mean, you could switch off the TV, but in the end, you will be missing your favorite TV show because he will stay talking for hours. And when I mean hours, it's like 4 or 5 hours on TV. Imagine just talking and talking.
So Chavez first gets elected in 1999, or
1998, then
okay,
he took, his government started in 1999.
yeah, and I think then after that somehow they got a new constitution through, or what happened there?
Yeah, he went, and one of the first things he did was to modify the constitution. And years later, he realized that the constitution that he approved wasn't, as socialist as he wanted it to be. And he decided to promote a different constitution that was denied by the assembly back in the day. Like actually, he made people vote for the constitution change, similar to what happened in Chile not so long ago, and people voted against that. And that's, I think, is one of the few cases in which the electoral system actually respected the results from and the will of the people. and the constitution was declined, but he already changed the constitution back in the day. So he wanted to modify the own constitution that he changed, essentially.
Yeah. Why did the middle class initially support Chavez?
I think that it's because Venezuela was already coming through a turmoil, and Venezuela had they essentially it was like a two-party system. Even though we had different parties, the ones ruling were usually COPEI and Acción Democrática. So people were
Copay
like,
and Axiom Democratica. Yeah.
exactly. So one was more conservative. It was like a Christian Democratic Party, COPEI, and the Acción Democrática was like more, center left, let's say. And they were usually the ones swinging from, like, one time it was this party in power, then this party, then the other party, then this party, similar to, for example, what we see in Canada between liberals and conservatives, or what you see in the US with Democrats and Republicans. So Venezuelans, especially from the middle class, the 90s were a period of turmoil. There were protests like the Caracazo, which was very famous back in the day. They were already like looking for a different alternatives, right? But sometimes a different alternative doesn't mean that it's better. And that's exactly what happened. They went from these traditional parties to a party that was more radical in the end of the day. And that's how Hugo Chavez pretty much made it to power.
Was anybody out there really pro-capitalist, or were they all just said,
Well,
maybe we should try cutting back some of these programs instead of growing them? I mean,
I don't remember honestly most of the electoral campaign from the 90s, because I mean I was born in that decade, so I was too young. I don't recall many of those stuff. But Venezuela used to have thinkers who were actually more free market, political public opinions writers, and the one that comes to my mind is actually Carlos Rangel, who was a very popular Venezuelan classical liberal. Unfortunately, they burned down his books in the Public University of Caracas because, for them, he was like a right wing extremist, or, a capitalist in the bad sense of the word. But Carlos Rangel was one of the thinkers that used to warn against, like these government actions. And he pretty much predicted what Venezuela went through.
yeah, that's
So, but from a political point of view, no one was really a classical liberal. We didn't have a Millet or someone like that back in the day.
that was Carlos what?
Carlos Rangel.
Rangel.
Mm-hmm.
R-A-N. Oh, Rangel. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Now he died. Yeah, he died in 1988 though. So yeah, so he wouldn't have been alive.
But if you see what the thing he said, he predicted everything that later on Hugo Chavez did. The
Oh,
guy was a liberal in every sense of the word, like a classical liberal.
he was only 58 and he took himself out. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Unfortunate. I've not heard of him. I wonder what. That's a rather sad story, but yeah, I've Rangel. So it's like angel, but with an R. So,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. Okay, I just when that was it. Yeah, it looks like he was at. Oh, he was. Oh, of course he did a master's at NYU. Of course, that makes sense. New York University.
And not only that, he wrote a book that is called From the Good Savage to the Good Revolutionary.
Yeah.
And he described a lot of the problems that we see in Latin American society and the relation with the US, and how, we tend to use the US as this bad monster in the background. And especially is something used by populist regimes and governments in Latin America.
Well, unfortunately, I do think the U.S. government probably has supported some bad actors or people who did things that may not have been democratic or may not have. And sometimes maybe these countries were better off in the end, but the the path to get there was rather messy or violent. I mean, you know, I'm thinking largely of Pinochet in Chile, but there were others, you know.
And not on, but the problem right now that we have with many governments is that no matter what, they need external enemy. And that external enemy that they use is usually the US. Either the US has involvement or not, you know, like that's their strategy because that's how they want. If you want to be a hero, you need to have a villain. And you know, you're gonna use as your villain, for example, in the case of the Chavismo, it was the US, or it was, you know, the opposition that was supported by the US. They usually come with this speech because it's a way of putting yourself like it's us, the patriotic Venezuelans, against them, and them is our enemy.
I assume also that you know, that Chavez was always aligned with Castro.
Yes, he was. He actually considered Cuba the ally, and you know, like an example of what was the name, like brotherhood between Venezuela and Cuba.
And I know Castro really started messing around in other countries, even going back to the 1970s after he consolidated in Cuba, which was, of course, was another country that was at one point doing very well and is not doing so well at all. I don't know. It makes me wonder, you know, too, if who's worse off right now, Cuba or Venezuela. But
No, like
yeah,
the Cubans have a long record of interventionism in other
oh
countries.
yeah,
And I mean, look at Angola, for example. They even got involved there.
yeah.
And, you know, people usually underestimate them because they think, oh, it's at this tiny, poor island. And it's like, no, they actually have a lot of influence in other countries in the region.
And one thing also too, though, is you know, being an island, it actually makes it a lot harder to leave. You know, Venezuelans are certainly you know, leaving. I get most of them are going to Colombia, I suppose, right?
Many of them are living to Colombia, but many of them don't stay in Colombia. So they go to Colombia and sometimes they go to Peru, to Chile, to other South American countries. But right now, the trend is that they are going all the way up through Central America to the US.
Oh
So
wow.
they cross the Darien Gap, they go through all the Central American countries and Mexico in order to make it to the US.
So they want to make it to the U.S. Yeah. So yeah, yeah. I've heard, and you know, certainly heard about them going to Argentina, and Milei loves the Venezuelan immigrants. I know that I've seen at least one picture of him holding the Venezuelan flag.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're in the 90s here, and Chavez starts consolidating with the Constitution. What was the when would people start realize this was not going the way that they were hoping it would go?
That's a good question, but I think it really started with the oil company itself. And I remember that when Hugo Chavez, as I mentioned, the oil company was very nationalized many years ago. But with Hugo Chavez, he went and took a step forward, and he started to replace basically everyone in position of power or influence in the oil company for people who were loyal to his party. So instead of merely being nationalized, it was also under the heavy political influence of the government. So what they did was like, now PDVSA belongs to everyone. PDVSA is the name of the oil company, Petróleos de Venezuela.
Yes.
And what he said is like, oh, you know, because now this belongs to the Venezuelan people. But obviously, that's not how things work with government ownership. It doesn't belong to the Venezuelan people. It belongs to the government that started to take money from the oil company and, you know, either put it in their bank accounts abroad through corruption, or, you know, use it to fund their campaigns, their political campaigns, their political strategy. They use it, the money coming from the oil company for everything. Sure, part of that money still went through social programs that were also poorly executed, but most of that money went honestly to corruption. So one of the bigger signs is that when he started to do this change, there was what we call a paro. They went on a strike on the oil company. So the country, from one day to another, we didn't have gasoline, and people had to line up during days because all the employees in PDVSA were on a strike because they were like, wow, like you are literally replacing us without any reason and just taking over and kicking us out. Like that's like in labor rights in Venezuela, which is interesting when you see unions supporting the Chavismo. It's like, no, these people are anti-union and anti-labor. They are just gonna do whatever they want, period. And what they did was that they didn't only kick them out. After they went on a strike, they actually persecuted them. So many of these former employees from the oil company, they had to flee the country because they were either they fleeing or facing jail time because Chavez said so. And I remember that that was the first red flag that a lot of people started to be like, this is not constitutional, this is not legal, this is wrong. And then starting from that, other things happening, like, he took over, for example, national TV channels because he didn't like criticism. So since there were some journalists criticizing his government, he didn't like that and he just shut down TV channels, censorship essentially. And yeah, economic downfall later on. But I think that the main or one of the biggest red flags is the one I mentioned with the oil company. And this happened in like 2002, something like that.
Yeah. So what happened after that in 2002? Chavez just consolidated power and things gradually got
Hmm.
worse.
Exactly.
Yeah, and Chavez, was also his death was rather unexpected. He was only 58. What ended up killing him? I mean,
Cancer. He got
cancer.
cancer.
This is obviously I'm a little conspiracy minded. Do you think there was any medical malpractice involved, or do you think somebody was trying to kill him, or do you think it just happened?
No,
Yeah,
he just decided he got cancer and he decided to get treated in one of the best countries with the best healthcare in the world, according to himself, Cuba. And yeah, like he got the option of going to, fancy hospitals in Brazil. He got the option of checking out in other,
yeah.
healthcare, and he went to Cuba. And I mean, the reality is that the Cuban healthcare system is not really the best, and he died there.
So he might have died anyway, but so it sounds though really he still was a believer though. I
He
mean,
was a believer, no, for real, he
he
was.
wasn't. I don't know if he was. Maybe other people around him were just because this is the thing. You have the idealists get in there, but then to get in there, they have to go out and hire the gangsters, and then the gangsters usually take over, and sometimes it ends up a case too where the gangsters immediately start shooting all the idealists because they're no longer of use to them. But uh, so what's so he died, and then Maduro took over. How exactly did Maduro take over? Was it just a
No,
did
it
Chavez,
wasn't
did
as
Chavez
simple
anointed
as,
him, or what? Or how did that happen?
yes, Chavez appointed him. He needed someone who will continue the socialist project of the 21st century. And the way that he did it was appointing Nicolas Maduro. It was like a king giving his crown, essentially. Like it felt like that. It was so strange because that's not how it's supposed to work in a republic. Like you are supposed to have candidates, elections, you elect a leader in the party, things like that. You choose a leader in the party. And the way that they did it was no, it was like, this is gonna be my leader now. Everyone vote for him. And that's what happened. Like it was just like a king giving his crown.
Has there really been an honest election since 1998?
And honestly, it depends on what you define as honest. I think that the popularity of Hugo Chavez was real. Like the guy was really elected.
Okay.
But you need to also consider the fact that in Venezuela, political campaigns, I mean, they use it, for example, the resources of the state to pay for every kind of political advantage, which in many
Okay.
countries that would be illegal. And they did it regardless. They also used government handouts to promote their party, to
Yeah.
promote their leader, like all these kind of things that, again, if you do that in a country like Canada, for example, people will be calling you out, like this is not correct. So it depends on what you consider, like fair elections in this situation.
Well, yeah, that's a very good point. There are different types of electoral dishonesty, and I guess I would say where every vote is properly counted.
Oh yeah,
Yeah. So
Chavez won because people literally voted for him.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, but in America we have certain restrictions like ballot access laws and other things like that. There are definitely they're open conspiracies to keep just these two horrible political parties fighting over it, and then they say you have a choice, but it's basically get shot with a gun, get shot with a pistol, or get shot with a rifle is what it kind of is. Uh, and then they call that a choice. But yeah, I don't know that much about Canada, but I know it's Canada looks like it has more competition, but I'd probably have to live it before I really knew how it worked.
That's a completely different system that we have here. Is
Yeah,
more parliamentary monarchies, but
yeah,
let's not deviate from Venezuela.
yeah. I don't want to deviate from Venezuela either. So was his base still the middle class, or did the base change? Or
The base started to change. The base
who
started to change.
yeah,
The ones who became more supportive of Hugo Chavez were the poor class, the
yeah,
ones in the lower bottom.
yeah. Is there? I know this is the case in other South American countries, especially Peru and Bolivia. But is there a divide between descendants of Europeans and indigenous South Americans who have always been there, or is Venezuela pretty much mostly people who came from Europe or descendants of people who came from Europe?
Venezuela is more like a Caribbean country. Like if you go to Puerto Rico, for example, you're
Okay.
gonna find like everyone is race
Yeah.
mix essentially.
Yeah.
And Venezuela is very similar. Like in Venezuela, there was a lot of racial mixture. So you will find people who look more European, but the mom might be an indigenous person,
Yeah.
and things like that is super common. So I wouldn't say like there was really a racial divide. I know what you're mentioning about Peru, but Venezuela isn't like
Yeah.
that, no.
Yeah. There's definitely a divide in Peru. I mean, I don't know. And I think, and I mean, everybody in Venezuela pretty much speaks Spanish, I suppose, right? I mean, yeah, it's a
Yeah, and in Venezuela, the indigenous population is very small. And, many of them in the beginning, many of them were supportive of Chavismo. Later on, now they are not either. Like, actually, I remember that they banned the representatives from the Amazon state in the past because they said they voted for the opposition's deputies back in the day,
yeah.
and they banned the representation in the legislative assembly in Venezuela. And I remember that there was a big shock because this government tries to preach and be like, oh, we are inclusive with our indigenous people and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And then they were like, we don't even have representation. This is a republic, or it is not. Like this doesn't make sense.
Yeah. What state was that?
Amazonas.
Oh, the Amazon state. Yeah. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
Because Venezuela still has I mean, a large portion of the country is still just rainforest. I mean, for example, I don't know. Uh,
Yeah.
I mean, there really aren't any. I mean, this is just no man's land. There's no roads or.
Like
Yeah.
Amazonas,
Yeah.
Bolivar State, Delta
Amazon.
Macuro State, all of them are pretty much like what you mentioned,
Yeah.
very rural, very rainforest, as you
Very
said.
wild. Yeah. Yeah. It's. I've seen this parts in Peru. Yeah. It's. But there's. I wasn't sure if there was a divide there or not. Yeah. That's still. Because in Peru, there. In parts of Peru, there's still about 8 million people who speak Quechua. So it's. Which is actually the third most spoken language in South America. after
No, like in Venezuela, we still have indigenous people speaking their
yeah,
languages, but most of them speak Spanish too. So,
yeah. Okay, so where do we go after how things go after Maduro came in? So
and people say things like, "Oh, with Chavez, the country wouldn't have experienced what we did because obviously things got worse. When Maduro gets elected, like inflation got worse, scarcity got worse, political persecution got worse as well. But you know, like the way that I see it is that actually things got worse because of Chavez's decisions. So essentially, Chavez took the bad decisions, but he didn't live up to the consequences. The one who lived up to the consequences was actually Maduro.
yeah,
That's essentially how it went. And he didn't take the right decisions to actually reverse that, to actually be like, oh, we need to fix this. No. But for example, Maduro hasn't expropriated the number of businesses that Chavez did. Chavez was the one pointing at businesses and saying, expropriate this, expropriate that. Like he was the one who pretty much did all this stuff. Or for example, right now you go to Venezuela and you will find that businesses are allowed to sell things in US dollars. And they even put it in the price tag with the US dollar price. That's something that back during the Hugo Chavez era was banned. It was forbidden to do. So we're talking about, in a certain way, Chavez was actually more restrictive and more socialist in a certain way, let's say.
yeah. Is Maduro as much of a believer as he, or is he just kind of doing whatever thinks will help him stay in power?
Yeah, no, the second, absolutely. In the case of Maduro, it was the second. Like the thing that I saw the last time I went to Venezuela, and I went to Venezuela back December, is
Yeah.
that, for example, there's no scarcity anymore. There's no scarcity in Venezuela. You go to a supermarket and you will find everything,
Oh,
but
that's
everything is in US dollars.
yeah.
So essentially, the economy is dollarized.
Yeah, and I've also heard there's been some degree of Bitcoin adoption there as well. Is that right?
Yeah, but not as much, not really.
Yeah.
It's mostly US dollars, the ruling currency.
That seems to be the place in a lot of cases that they're adopting dollars, even though there's nothing official happening about it, which is certainly progress. And I look at a place like Venezuela. It's like, how can people be starving? There's a rainforest there. It's that means you've got plenty. You've got every fruit you could possibly want, and certainly other things you can hunt. But yeah,
Well,
so
I mean,
yeah,
back in the day when there
it's
was a
politics. Yeah.
scarcity, people would literally line up in houses that had mango trees because they
Yes.
wanted to at least eat mango because people were really starving.
Yes, mangoes. Yeah, there's some very interesting fruits down there too. When I was in Peru, I had camu juice, and that's nowhere in America. So, what foods do you miss up there in Canada? I gotta know.
And what food?
Yeah,
I don't know. I miss the Venezuelan cheese. That's what I miss the most
yeah.
because they to do it you need to do it with raw milk, and here it's impossible. But yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, the Venezuelan cheese. Yeah, every that's something that's worldwide. There's so many different cheeses out there. It's really amazing.
Yeah.
So from there, there was just the recent election, and do you think the opposition actually won the election, or do you think maybe it was fairly counted or not fairly counted, or
Oh no, the opposition. In this case, the opposition won the election, no doubt.
yeah,
Like the interesting fact about this election and what makes it different from other elections is that in this occasion, the opposition was organized enough to prove the fraud.
yeah,
Because in the past, in the last election before this one, they committed fraud, but there was no one to actually track every single vote. And like, oh, you're saying that we commit fraud, but who are you to prove it? How are you gonna prove it? The difference right now is that they actually managed to prove it. They counted all the electoral receipts.
yes,
So that's what the Maria Corina Machado and Edmundo Gonzalez did, was
Yes.
such an organized work. And many of the people that they have now under arrest in the Helicoide are people who actually were part of the voting centers who counted those electoral receipts.
Yes.
So they are punishing them for being part of this process.
Yeah. So there's Edmundo Gonzalez, who of course was the largely running against Maduro, and of course there's Maria Corina Machado, who's been a very prominent figure out in Venezuela for really about 20 years. What can you tell us about Maria?
Maria Corina Machado, well, she comes from actually like a wealthy family in Venezuela. Her family had business in Venezuela. If I'm not wrong, her mother is a journalist. She has always advocating more for classical liberal ideas. She is pretty much a center right woman as in the ideological spectrum. Actually, she has even funny videos saying that you should never turn to the left, not even when you're driving, turn to the left, like things like that, because she doesn't like left wing ideas. And Maria Corina Machado has been very opposed to the regime, even back in the time of Hugo Chavez. Actually, one of her more remarkable videos was when she said in the assembly to the president, the former president Hugo Chavez, she stood up and said to him, President, Mr. President, what you're doing, that is theft. Because expropriating businesses, you are stealing. That's theft. She said that in national TV. She called Hugo Chavez a theft, which no one would have expected or dare to do that. And Hugo Chavez, he just laughed on her face and said like a bunch of stuff. But like like she knew that the country was heading in a very bad direction. The way that I see her, that she's a very brave woman. She has faced persecution in the past. Actually, she hasn't been able to see her children in like 10 years, which
Yeah.
is crazy. And she's the kind of person that if she really wanted, she could take a plane and leave Venezuela forever, and that's it. Go to your children, go to your family. But she isn't doing that. And she actually just let Edmundo Gonzalez leave because she was like, Edmundo is leaving because the way that they persecuted Edmundo Gonzalez was brutal. But she's staying in Venezuela. And, it's very crazy when you think about it. She's a very brave woman, in my opinion.
Yeah, she's still there. So yeah, her children left the country because they've been threatened. I mean, where are her children? Where are her kids?
I think they're in the United States, actually.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so we've got So and this election has certainly this election has been pretty much widely condemned, even by people that we would call socialists. I mean, even Petro in Colombia's.
I don't think Petro has really condemned the election. He has been throwing some statements here and there, but they're very mild. Now, a socialist that has been very direct in condemning these elections was Boric from Chile.
Yeah,
the Chilean president, he was one of the first presidents who said this is fraudulent. Like this is not a real election. Like what is going on?
Yeah, it's what can you tell us about the Sao Paulo Forum?
Well, the Sao Paulo Forum was the strategy that they used to expand the left-wing influence or the Marxist ideas to South America. And that was started between Lula da Silva and Hugo Chavez under the leadership of Fidel Castro. That was the purpose of the Sao Paulo Forum. And later on, years later, if you saw South America eventually turn red, like you got people like Correa running in Ecuador, you got people like Cristina Kirchner in Argentina, Mojica was also in Uruguay, you got also what was Evo Morales in Bolivia, who tried to also commit fraud, and things like that. Like the Forum of Sao Paulo was a left-wing strategy, and it was effective. Now they have El Foro de Puebla, which is like basically the one leading with the churches right now, Mexico, which is very scary because they are your neighbors now.
It can be because I know so many, I know a lot of people who live in Mexico, and a lot of people really love Mexico. There's a lot of things to love about Mexico. It's definitely has its own character. The Sao Paulo Forum, Anna, I've repeated this like so many times on this show, but I was 18 when the Berlin Wall came down. None of us thought we would still be fighting this now. So why is this, in spite of all of the failures and all the evidence that's there, why is anybody taking these ideas seriously at all? I suppose the college professors are all in on it, right? But
It's
these
different
ideas
things.
how is it that these ideas aren't dead?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have an opinion that is because many people are always going to be unsatisfied with what they have. In these cases, the governments that are like more free market. And it's because I see it even here in Canada. Like we even have a communist party in Canada now. And it's like, I wonder the same because it's what you mentioned. Like, hadn't we seen enough of this ideology failing time after time? But they think that that wasn't real communism, that that's just dictatorship and totalitarianism. They try to make a distinct, to separate one thing from another. What makes these places totalitarian is the fact that you have an ideology that enables that fits into that. In order to turn your country into a socialist government, you need a big government. And by doing that, you are already risking becoming a totalitarian nation because you're giving too much power to the one that has power already. Yeah. So that's the way it works.
Yeah, it seems that way too. It does seem though is that Central Europe and former Soviet republics have somewhat been inoculated by this because it was imposed on them. But other than that, it doesn't seem like sort of. By the way, one thing I wanted to bring up too, maybe you can cover this a little bit. What's going on with this land dispute with your neighbor to the east, Guyana? I mean, apparently
that's a very
been going on for a long time.
For that, you need another show, let me tell you, because it's a long dispute going back since Venezuela was still a colony of Spain.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to summarize that issue in the fact that this is not only a Chavismo issue. Maria Corina, she has been very clear that a new government, they need to take the issue of Guyana seriously. So the thing with the territorial dispute is something that goes beyond political parties or ideologies in Venezuela. It's a matter of territorial sovereignty, and that goes back to many, many, many years ago. Venezuela has a claim internationally over that. The Geneva Agreement is actually still in place, and they say that both countries need to find a way through diplomatic decisions to fix that dispute. But the dispute is still going on. So that's why in Venezuela we consider that land under claim, because it is a land under claim. It's a very extensive issue.
Yes, well, I know one thing Chavez did when he came in too is he actually changed the flag from 7 stars to 8 stars. I know one lady who was very, I don't know if you know Martha Bueno, but she said, says, I was really happy when somebody gave me a 7-star flag. She said she considered that the real flag of Venezuela.
It is the real flag. It is a real flag, because the thing of Hugo Chavez is that he did it all because of symbolism. He didn't care about the Guyanese Essequibo cause. Like, one of the biggest proof that we have is that Hugo Chavez was always friendly to the Guyanese government. Like, he even gave oil for free to the CARICOM, that is this organization of Caribbean countries, and Guyana is part of that. So you are pretending that you care about territorial sovereignty, but you're giving our oil to the people that took our land. Like, that doesn't make any sense if you think about it. So it was all, I would call it a pantomime. I would call it just a theater for him to pretend that he cared, but he really didn't.
Yes. So yeah. So one thing also is, we know some people have been arrested. You know a person who's been arrested, and we know some people who are also been living at the embassy for a while. Let's talk about those before we go. Uh,
Yeah,
what
that
can
is
you tell us
a
about your
very
friend Maria Oropesa, for example? Yeah.
well, Maria Oropesa, she's one of these persons that was involved in counting the electoral receipt for her state. And Maria is the main leader in her state, Portuguesa. And she's also part of the Ladies of Liberty Alliance. She is also the chapter leader there. And the way that Maria approached the situation was, going through all these little towns, collecting all the votes, making sure that every vote was counted, and then sending that to Caracas. So that what they did was like, like little ants doing each one of them some duty, and that's how they managed to gather all this information. And Maria, in addition to that, well, she was very vocal against the government. She knew what she was exposed to. That's the reality. And Maria, the same day that she was arrested, Maduro started an operation that is called Operación Tuntún, Operation Knock Knock. Basically, they knock on your door and they arrest you without any warrant, any judicial order. You are just kidnapped by the government. And Maria, on the same day she was taken, she actually made a video that she posted on social media. It
Yes.
went viral, saying like the Operación Tuntún is just a strategy to intimidate the opposition and it's completely illegal. It's just a proof that these people they behave like criminals, and they are criminals. And the same day she posted this video, she became a victim of that situation. She even live streamed her arrest. And it was a very stressful situation, because imagine that you have a friend, and the next thing you see on their Instagram is they're being taken away by criminals. Like they're being taken away by these people, and you have nothing to do other than watch. That was my situation. That was the situation of our friends. Her mom find out because of social media that her daughter was taken by the government. So that's the reality of many political prisoners in Venezuela right now. And the situation is so crazy. It is so crazy that they can take you even because you posted something on Instagram, even because you made some criticism on Twitter. It's insane.
Yes, of course, and of course, while we're here, also, yeah, yeah. So, what do you think is going to happen with her?
What is gonna happen is
Yeah.
that I don't even know what is gonna happen, because apparently one of the deals that they had with Edmundo Gonzalez, who just left for Spain, is like, if you leave, we are not going to crack down the Argentinian embassy. We're going to release political prisoners, but we don't know if the government is going to comply, because it's a
Yeah.
criminal government in the end of the day.
Trust us, and of course, also we want to talk about these people here, these six individuals who are currently at the they're in the Brazilian embassy, right?
Argentina.
Oh, they're in the Argentinian embassy. Okay, so, but yeah, and they've been in the embassy for how long?
I think more than 6 months now. I haven't been
Yes.
tracked the time, but it's been a while. So imagine the situation of them, right? Like living in those conditions for so long. And I don't know if you're aware that they were also cut the water, the service of water. Like they don't
Yes.
even have running water in that embassy. Um, Another interesting fact is that that embassy, since Argentina is no longer having diplomatic relations with Venezuela, because the Venezuelan government kicked the diplomatic mission of Argentina, they kicked them out. The one that is being providing this protection to these six individuals is the Brazilian government, which is not reliable, because it's a government that is friends with Maduro. So it's a very stressful situation. These people, they're brave because they were persecuted since the campaign was was running, because they were part of Maria Corina's team. They are part of Maria Corina's team. So they were punished because of that. And instead of leaving and fleeing the country, all that they did was to assume the situation that you were going to live in an embassy for only God knows how long. Like, imagine how committed you need to be to see your country free to take that kind of decision.
Definitely, and life in an embassy is not necessarily something you want to spend. The lack of sunlight is certainly not a good thing, and
The lack of going out, the lack
yes.
of living alive.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah. We're not meant to stay inside all the time. It's
No.
we're meant to go, and even some of the prisons, you have a yard out in the middle of the prison. You can go outside and look up and see sunlight. But yeah, it's definitely not.
Like,
You
this
know what
is one
happened
of
with
the
Julian Assange? It's definitely not something you want to be in.
like this is the kind of things that I'm telling you. Like, when you think about all these situations, let's ignore for a moment the obvious fraud that they committed. Just the fact that you did this with political opposition, that already makes your electoral process a sham, a scam,
Yes.
because you're not even respecting political opposition.
Yes, because that's yeah, it's not about trying to convince you that my ideas are right. It's just about, okay, we'll go out and put you in jail if you don't agree with us. It's
Exactly. That's
how many
insane.
how many people have left Venezuela in the last 25 years?
Oh my God. I mean, I don't have the exact number, but I think we're about like 8 million. For a population the size of Venezuela, that's a lot.
And that was 8 million out of what I think started off with what?
Like, I know that Venezuela has right now even more refugees abroad than Afghanistan. And that tells you a lot.
Yeah, well, Venezuela currently is at uh, Venezuela's currently at about 30 million, and you said there were 8 million. So yeah, that is a lot. As Since Venezuela is a very Catholic country, as the Vatican or anybody there said anything about this, or is Pope Francis just reminding us that he's a communist?
Well, they tried to negotiate in the past. I think it was during the time of Guaido or Leopoldo Lopez. I don't remember. I remember that the Vatican has tried to mediate to find like a way of like support the transition of a democratic transition. And I remember that the government also shut them down. Now let's remember something. With this kind of governments, you need to be smart as well.
Yep.
Like, I'm not a fan of Pope Francis, if you ask me, but I also understand that the Catholic Church can find in a very delicate situation if they don't play their cards right. And with that, take the example of Nicaragua. In Nicaragua, the persecution that the Catholic Church has been facing is insane. Like, they have been attacking actually churches. Like, many priests, they have found that they need to flee the country. Like, maybe if I was the Vatican, I wouldn't like to see Venezuela going the same path. And these people, they're brutal. They're not going to respect anyone. They can totally do that if they want to.
I wasn't sure, about some of the socialists. They seem to have a different relationship with the church than the Russian communists, who were absolutely positively brutal toward the church.
Yeah, no, like, for example,
Yeah,
like I have spoken with Nicaraguan refugees here in Canada, and what they tell me is crazy, because what the church did in Nicaragua is that during the protest of 2019, if I'm not wrong, they decided to provide shelter to demonstrators, and as a punishment, they started to crack down the church as well. So I can see, like, if the government decides to take that instance in Venezuela, they could do it. They can do whatever they want.
okay, yeah, so as long as the church doesn't really say anything, they just kind of leave the church alone, because it's
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. And another interesting fact is that, you mentioned how for example, in Cuba, they banned Christmas. People were not allowed to celebrate Christmas. In Venezuela, Maduro announced the opposite. He wants to start the Christmas season in October in Venezuela. Because for them, since Venezuelans enjoy the holiday season so much, they want to use it as a means of distraction. So they are going to start putting Christmas decorations next month. Imagine how crazy that is.
Oh, sometimes they do that. They seem to be pushing things earlier. You know,
They
at
want to
least
distract people.
there's definitely ways to distract people and keep them on their toe or keep them looking at other things. So I think. Do you have any? What was your favorite part of all this?
Oh, for what, the conversation?
Yes.
I think honestly is the fact that we were available to come through the historical part to the main problem, because
Yeah.
something that we need to focus on is that this didn't happen from one day to another. This happened gradually. Like it's not like, oh, you vote today and then that's it. And no, it's something that you need to be aware, because little things, little signs, little red flags that you find might become a greater problem in the future. So it's not something that it takes time.
Yes, that could happen. Do you have anything else to say before we go?
No, nothing. Thank you so much, Chris, for this space. I have appreciated our conversation and enjoyed it a lot.
I've appreciated too. Thank you for reminding me of why Venezuela has the best women in South America.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Yes, yeah. Well, please like my videos, subscribe to the channel, check out my Substack, go check out my novel Escape from the Village. Go to buymeacoffee.com if you want to support the show. Thank you, Ana Rizo. We hope for the best for your wonderful country. I hope it's probably next on my list of places I'd like to visit, but not right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm Chris Baker. We're out.